Welcome to another episode of the PFF College Football Show. Max Chadwick alongside Dalton Wassman here. Day 2 of the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine here in Indianapolis. Yesterday, Dalton, we heard from coaches and general managers. Today, we finally heard from the prospects here at the Combine. Defensive line, a loaded defensive line class, and linebackers were at the podiums today. And a lot of really interesting quotes we got from a lot of those players.
Yeah, and it's great to hear from all these players and get a feel for the personalities, right? Some of them extremely confident, some of them more reserved, some of them really getting into the finer details of the game. I just love to hear it from a first-person perspective, what their play style especially is like and what they're looking for themselves as much as the organizations are looking for from them.
So we're not going to use a lot of PFF stats here on the show because obviously we're talking a lot with the players at the podiums, but every stat on every prospect in the 2025 NFL Draft is available to you guys with a PFF Plus subscription at subscribe.pff.com. Not only that, you get access to our 2025 NFL Mock Draft Simulator where you can draft a full first round or 7 rounds if you want for your favorite team or all 32 teams. You can trade players and trade picks as a part of that mock draft simulator. And a lot of players, Dolan, right now are kind of being put on the trade block. So you can trade those players if you want to using the PFF Mock Draft Simulator. Again, subscribe.pff.com to get access to all of that today. Talk about 2 of the top defensive linemen in this draft. Let's start off with Abdul Carter because one of those guys is being placed on the trade block is a Tennessee Titans edge rusher, Harold Landry. The Titans already had a need at edge rusher, and now if they trade away Harold Landry, it becomes maybe their biggest need on the entire team. And Abdul Carter right now is the second best odds to go number 1 overall in the NFL draft. So I thought his podium was electric. He was very, very confident out there. But how real do you think Abdul Carter going number 1 overall to the Titans is now?
I think between the Harold Landry trade rumors, and they were thinking about, I think, taking Carter even with Landry still in tow, right? And you know, you think about like yesterday when we got to hear from Brian Callahan, he got asked as many questions about Abdul Carter and edge defenders and what he looks for from that position as he did about the quarterback. So all the feel right now to me is that I think it's a 50-50 proposition that it could be Carter, it could be one of the 2 top quarterbacks, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, and certainly the Titans have a need at both, right? They were last in the league in passing grade this past year. They were near the bottom in pass rush grade, especially from their edge defenders. It's a good interior group, right, with Jeffrey Simmons and Tavondre Sweat, but very tough for them right now off of the edge to get a legitimate pass rush going. And the Harold Landry thing, it's kind of a business decision too. He makes a lot of money. Maybe he doesn't give them the consistent pass rush presence. He's a really good run defender, but if you're paying top dollar for a defensive end, you need elite pass rush production. If they feel like Carter can give them that, and oddly a situation that's on a lesser scale similar to Cleveland with the Myles Garrett trade request as well. Now you've got 2 teams at the top with their best edge rusher. In one case, in Cleveland's case, a superstar of all-time caliber, right? But with trade requests in and looking for other places to go, while a potentially generational talent like Abdul Carter sitting there at 1 or 2 on the board, I think it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch now because it seems like Carter, alongside with Travis Hunter as well, is separated as the guys who could be taken with the first overall pick.
And Carter said before at his podium that he thinks he should be the number 1 overall pick. In fact, one of the quotes he said was, I'm the best player in the country, and the best player in the country should be the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. He's a supremely confident football player, and you love that confidence, right? I have an edge rusher like him. I thought his podium was probably the most electric one of anyone because he just was such a confident player, like I said before. Obviously, it backs it up on the field as well. So I think Abdul Carter going number 1 overall, especially with the Harold Landry news that came out today, is looking more and more realistic. And he even said, he's like, listen, Super Bowl teams are built off of, standout players. I'm a standout player. So he thinks he should be the number 1 overall pick. I know he broke it down yesterday with the Titans and what they look for in a quarterback and how that might point to Shedeur Sanders. And both of us said, who would you take at number 1? We both said Shedeur Sanders. But if you don't take Shedeur Sanders, maybe Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, Cam Ward, where would you go there?
It's tough. I mean, if it's the ultimate question of how much more valuable is a quarterback to you than just taking the best, who you think, especially in the first spot, is the best player in the draft. Every team has this, there's always the need versus value conundrum, but it's with a quarterback, it's different. And with a quarterback situation like the Titans, right this minute, we're not going to have clarity on this until we see what happens in free agency. Do they get a stopgap option? Do they get someone maybe on a 3-4 year deal like a Sam Darnold? We won't know really the answer for probably about another 3 weeks or so. If they come out of free agency and they don't have a legitimate option at quarterback, then I start to lean back the other way towards Shedeur or Cam. But if they find a starting caliber quarterback, even if just for 1 year, I got to think right now that Abdul Carter would become the favorite to be that pick.
And I don't think if they don't add a quarterback in free agency, I don't think they'll be willing to go into next year with Will Levis again and ride that roller coaster.
Can't.
So I think they are either, like you said, they're either going to get a veteran option in free agency. Maybe they are in the Matthew Stafford sweepstakes. I highly doubt that, though. Or they go into the draft and maybe they trade down for number 1 overall, because also the Titans, got to remember, they only have 2 top 100 picks right now. And they have a lot of needs on that roster, so trading Harold Landry probably would net you a top 100 pick, but you could trade back from number 1 overall and stockpile more picks as well. That could be an option for Tennessee, because they even said, Mike Borgonzi, the general manager, he said he would not pass up on a generational talent in this draft. He also said at his podium, there are multiple generational talents in this draft, so he probably thinks to himself, hey, I could trade back from number 1 and maybe not get Abdul Carter, but I could still end up getting a Travis Hunter or something like that in this draft.
And is it possible, most people don't think so, but is it possible that maybe Borgonzi is somebody who thinks one of those 2 quarterbacks is one of those generational talents? Obviously, it's not thought of as a quarterback class like it was last year when we had 6 first-round guys and potentially 3 that people thought could have been considered generational. But does he think that? This is the part where we're not mind readers, right? We're trying, but everybody's got a different opinion. Every GM sees the game differently, and if he were to think, say, okay, like Cam Ward, if he thinks, wow, that guy could be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, it would be hard to pass that up too.
I think that's why I love the NFL scouting combine. But yesterday on the show, when we heard what Brian Callahan wants in a quarterback, accuracy, timing, decision making, all that, we're saying, okay, yeah, they're trying to move on from Will Levis, and we're looking, well, they're probably going to take a quarterback at number 1 overall. Then 24 hours later here at the Combine, the news of Harold Landry potentially being traded, and you're like, well, they're taking Abdul Carter number 1. We have no idea who's going to be the first overall pick.
2 months away.
Exactly. That's why I love the Combine, because you get all these rumors and reports that come out. It is a wide open race, where I feel like last year when the Bears had the first pick, Caleb Williams was the guy. We all knew he's the number 1 overall pick. The draft starts at number 2. Will the Commanders take Jaden Daniels or Drake May? We knew who the number 1 pick is going to be. In this draft, there are like 3 or 4 guys that go, yep, they have a great shot. I think Travis Hunter, I think Abdul Carter, I think Cam Ward, I think Shedeur Sanders all have almost an equal chance of going number 1 overall.
Right now, that's what it feels like, and the Titans are going to have to do a lot of research and a lot of thinking about how they want to build how they want to build the roster.
So Abdul obviously extremely confident in his press conference. Let's talk about Mason Graham, the top defensive tackle in this year's draft. He was more reserved in his press conference. One answer I did love that he said, listen, I'm an open book, man. I'm all business. There's no off-field issues with me. Like, I just only care about football, and that's all that really matters to me. So, again, Mason Graham, it shows up on his tape, man. He is just, you could tell the technique has been refined for him throughout his entire career to go along with crazy tools. That's why I think he's on the level of a Jalen Carter, Quinnen Williams as a prospect. He's that kind of player and worthy of being a top 5 pick in the draft. And you can even argue that, like you said before, he's like the safest bet in the 2025 NFL draft as well. The one answer I wanted to get into, Dawn, here on the PFF College Football Show from a college football angle was that one reporter asked him, what is your, like, if I was a general manager and I'm interviewing you and I said, Mason, pull up 1 or 2 plays on tape, this is why you should draft me, what would those 1 or 2 plays be? And he goes, man, all you got to see is the Ohio State game. That's it. I just love the one final jab as a Michigan player going at Ohio State one final time. He did, of course, later on in the podium section credit Ohio State, saying, listen, they were very talented this year. I knew once they made the playoff that they could make a run and win it, also credit to them. But I did love the in the best rivalry, maybe in all of sports, Mason Graham taking one last shot at them.
I mean, we mentioned it at the time, and they had 2 dominant players on the inside with Graham and Kenneth Grant. You best believe if you're going to beat the eventual national champions 13-10, it's because those guys on the inside dominated and just pressured Will Howard into mistakes, stopped the run. I mean, he really did. You could watch that one game from Mason Graham and go, yeah, first-round pick. I love right after that, though, he mentioned a second game, and if you roll back to 2023, if you remember the game against Minnesota where he came back from a broken thumb, playing with a club on his hand, and still just absolutely blew away Minnesota, he brought that one up, too, and he was like, yeah, I had one hand in that game, and I still just teed off on him. So he was like, yeah, those 2 games are probably the ones that tell you all you need to know. And you mentioned it, nothing but dominant during his entire career at Michigan, and the combination of athletic ability work ethic, technique, all of that just makes him such a great prospect. I really believe he's very soon going to be a top 10 defensive tackle in the league.
Absolutely. He had a 90.9 run defense grade in that win over Ohio State. 5 run defense stops alone in that game, 88.4 overall grade.
That performance alone, and Michigan wasn't making the playoff, but considering some of the other defensive lines that did make the playoff, when you think about Tennessee, Oregon had a deep group, Texas with their, they saw eventually, that one performance from Graham and Kenneth Grant made us think like, oh, Ohio State can't win a title with this offensive line. And it really jump-started the process of like, okay, we talked about it. It changed the run schemes. It changed. And Mason Graham is the type of guy who can just go out there and blow anybody away regardless of the game plan. Even in the playoff 2 years ago against Alabama and against Washington, he's the best player on the field.
He ironically probably helped Ohio State win a national title by being like, okay, we got to change this because this ain't working.
Is he another one that went undefeated against them?
Yes.
Right?
He did because 3 years and he went undefeated.
He can wear that forever. He don't care who won the title. He got a natty and he was 3.
I mentioned this in the NFL show. Jack Sawyer also had a podium today. Thank God those two were at the same time because I'm sure there have been some awkward glances at least between the two of them considering their history.
There's a whole lot of Ohio State guys and there's a handful of Michigan guys. You can bet the drills are going to get competitive.
Dude, Jack Sawyer bleeds scarlet red and Mason Graham bleeds Mason blue, dude. They are two diehard guys for Michigan and Ohio State. I just love that answer from Mason Graham. And listen, man, he's been a fantastic player his whole career, and obviously he very much enjoys being a Michigan Wolverine. And honestly, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, listen, he's not going to go number 4 overall to the Patriots with the other names they have in that roster, but there's a Ohio State connection there with Mike Vrabel. Maybe Mike Vrabel saw that answer. He's like, I'm not taking this guy.
I don't. From what I've heard, it's not. I don't think anything's off the table.
That's true.
If they feel like Mason Graham's best player on the board, they very well could do it.
That's true. All right, let's get out of the Big Ten. Go over to the SEC. A couple players, Dolan, that there's some interesting quotes from these two players. Jalen Walker, the linebacker/edge from Georgia. Danny Stutzman, the linebacker from Oklahoma. Jalen Walker at least said, someone asked him, is it harder to win the SEC title or a national title? He goes, it's harder to win in the SEC than it is to win a national championship. I don't know how real that is. I don't know if I agree with him there. But both of them were very much saying, even Stutzman's saying too, like the jump in competition is real going from the Big 12 to the SEC.
We heard this during the year from coaches, from Shane Beamer. We heard it at one point from Lane Kiffin. We've heard it a lot certainly during from the college football selection, that run up to that process. But no, I think as it relates to the draft, SEC players, especially in the last decade or two, have really been highly coveted in part because they play in the SEC, and that's the closest thing we have to NFL level competition. It's considered, we can debate what the best conference is, SEC, Big Ten, whatever, but the most talented conference is certainly the SEC. When you talk, with the recruiting rankings and how many teams, almost all the teams in the top 30, all of them get in there, and just the amount of NFL talent and the standard that Nick Saban kind of set there at Alabama and then Georgia and LSU and all these other teams follow. I think the idea of it for the draft is when you watch Jalen Walker, somebody like that, or even a Danny Stutzman who brought this up as well. Oklahoma making the switch from the Big 12 to the SEC. He said it. He goes, look, the talent level is greater. They run the football more in this conference. It's more physical. It's a gauntlet that you have to go through week in and week out. And it's something that when we pull it back to you talking about the college football playoff, it's what SEC coaches are trying to say. These teams are better. But we do need a way to quantify it. And this argument is not going to stop, right? And it's a deep conference with a boatload of talent. Even this year, we're going to have teams like Florida and Auburn on the upswing. And we're going to be having this debate again, how many teams from the SEC should make the playoff. But I think it's fun to hear from the player's perspective how much of a gauntlet that is when you're playing Georgia this week, Texas A&M next week, Ole Miss the next week. Remember that stretch that Florida had, their schedule at the end of the season that they had.
Those last 5 games
brutal,
were ridiculous.
Like LSU and Georgia and Texas all back-to-back. And the players, they feel that, right? So guys who have played in the SEC, and even Stutzman now for 1 year has done it, made that adjustment after playing, I believe, in the Big 12 for 3 years. For him, they've both mentioned that, and I think it's something that does go into the scouting process, level of competition. When we think about guys who come from, the group of 5, a Harold Fannin or, a Mike Green or somebody like that, well, it's a different level of competition. Whereas the SEC, you have no questions about that. If you were dominant in the SEC, there's no question. You think about Walker and Stutzman and those guys, but I find it that it ties it all together between the college season, the playoff selection process, where that goes, and all the arguments we have about that. If there were some sort of metric to quantify not just, because strength of schedule can sometimes be dependent just on surface level records, but that doesn't really give you the full depth of how difficult it is. And that's what the coaches like Beamer and Kiffin and everybody, even Nick Saban said it, what they're trying to get across of the SEC is better, but they're going to need more metrics to prove that, because then you get into bowl season and Big Ten teams start beating SEC teams. And look, I think it's more even than some say, but the SEC certainly has the most talent.
I would agree with that. I mean, just looking at the recruiting rankings this past year, 13 of the top 22 classes in the country for 2025 came from the SEC. Mississippi State had the 22nd best class in America. It was only 13th in the SEC. That's just insane, the level of high school recruiting, at least, in the SEC. And I do think with the expansion of conferences that we've had recently, the realignment of conference, I should say, with Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC and the Big Ten obviously adding Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA, there is becoming a bigger gap between the Big Ten and SEC and everybody else in college football. And I think it's closest to the NFL schedule that you can get is from the Big Ten SEC, because there's really no off weeks nowadays, just like there's no really off weeks in the NFL either. So I think Walker saying it wasn't that surprising. Stutzman I thought was more interesting because he did come from the Big 12, and he goes, there is a difference. There is a difference playing an SEC schedule than a Big 12 schedule. So I thought that was more interesting than what Jalen Walker was saying.
Yeah, and you just mentioned it. So, like, let's say in a one-game scenario, take Arizona State against Texas in that playoff game. For 1 week, they can play with those teams, but what the kind of pro SEC people are trying to get across is, yeah, we have to do that almost every week. We got to do that out of 9 conference games. We probably have to play a game at that level 5 or 6 times, right? So it is different. It is something that still is going to get likely tweaked or even just looked at when it comes to finding more metrics to measure a team's quality when it comes to the playoff selection process. That's the most interesting part to me is we've talked about this past year. How many is it going to be? 4, 5, 6 SEC teams? As some people would think 6 of them should have got in. South Carolina got raging hot at the end of the year, right? I think it's going to continue to be a debate for a long time, but the players saying it certainly helps the SEC's cause.
And we'll see, because it feels like the 12-team playoff might only be a 2-year thing. I feel like next year, and then the contract with ESPN runs out, there's talks of expanding it to 14 or 16 in 2026 and beyond. So it feels like we just started the 12-team era, but it might only be a 2-year thing. We'll get next season with a 12-team playoff, but after that, it might be an expanded playoff, and maybe the Big Ten and SEC, as a part of that deal, want guaranteed spots. It might be a thing where we say, hey, we need at least 4 teams to get in.
When they switch the format, we know Ohio State's going to win it, though. We do know that.
That's true. Yeah, we do know that. But let's say in the SEC, Dawn, with one guy, Nick Scorton, who I thought had a pretty interesting podium, and he talked about how his production at Texas A&M this past year wasn't as good as it was as Purdue because of the different scheme that he was playing in with the Aggies versus what he was able to do with the Boilermakers. I thought it was one of the more interesting answers we got at the podiums today at the Combine, just because that is a guy that Trevor Sikkema had as edge 1 in the draft. It seems like his stock is slipping. It even seems like his teammate Shamar Stewart is overtaking him in the edge rankings. I think it's a great point that he made, though, saying, hey, listen, I was asked to do a wildly different role than what I was asked to do at Purdue. That could explain why he had a little bit of a down year.
Love it. I absolutely love to hear it, though, because to be asked it's hard to get asked, hey, why did you produce less this year, at least on the surface, right? And to be self-aware enough to go, hey, it's not the same defense. I didn't have the same job, right? Travis talked about being curious about his play weight, and I think what it speaks to in the draft process is where a guy fits, right? Within a team, within a scheme, on a roster, who would want him with somebody? There's different defensive coaches that are going to have all sorts of ideas for what to do with him. Is he a stand-up, just pure speed kind of edge rusher, pass rusher like he was at Purdue? Is he going to have his hand in the dirt more like he did at Texas A&M, be a better run defender? He could be having that versatility under his belt, even though the surface level production wasn't quite as good this year as the year before. That could help him be a more well-rounded player. Or if a team goes, no, we liked him in 2023 better, well, then they're going to revert him back to that role. So I think the fact that we did get to see it from Scorton actually works as an advantage to him and to the scouting process, because you have a bigger sample of what this guy can do. How many guys do we see, especially in the mid to later rounds, that are like one-trick ponies, right? And we go, okay, they're really A+ at that one thing, but everything else lags. At least with Scorton, you have it on tape, and if you feel like that's not his role, that process of elimination can be just as important. Knowing what a guy can't do or can't do as well is a huge factor in evaluating them too, to getting them in the correct spot. What does every coach talk about when they talk about what's my job? Put players in the best position to succeed. Whatever road that is with Scorton, I think he'll be able to adjust to it. And I think it's an answer I think the more I think about it, that I like a lot, because he's at least self-aware enough to go, hey, this was my job. I did my job.
And I think that's kind of the macro level answer that he gave. Obviously, here on the PFF College Football Show, we have the data and numbers to give you the micro answer, like what was different, right, at Purdue versus what he did at Texas A&M. At Purdue, he was allowed to be, pin his ears back and rush the quarterback as a stand-up edge rusher. At Texas A&M, he had a lot more of his hands in the dirt, and he was more read and react. Because you mentioned before on the NFL show, Mike Elko's defense, first and foremost, wants to stop the run. And when you're stopping the run and the team drops back to pass, you try to, extend your hands a little bit, you see what they're doing, and then you rush the passer. Whereas at Purdue, he was just straight get after the quarterback, get in the backfield. So we looked it up, Dalton. 15 snaps at Purdue in 2023 with his hands in the dirt. He had 163 snaps this past year at Texas A&M with his hand in the dirt. And with his hand in the dirt, a 73 pass rushing grade. When he was standing up at Purdue, he had a 91 pass rushing grade. So it does speak to that, in that he wasn't as good as a 4-3 defensive end, as a 3-4 outside linebacker at Texas A&M. When he was allowed to get after the quarterback and just pin his ears back, he was a lot more effective in that role.
You know who that makes me think of is somebody who would see a stat like that and go, maybe we revert him back, or maybe we move him around a little. Man, I look at Philadelphia at 32,
dude,
and I just think about what they do with some of those stand-up edge rushers, right? Yeah, I've had Brandon Graham, Nolan Smith, Josh Sweatson might be leaving in free agency. I've had so many great guys off the edge, and right at 32 might be that sweet spot for Scoreton, and Roseman goes, look, like you mentioned, coming into this season, he was the top edge rusher on a lot of people's boards, right? Because of what he did at Purdue and going to A&M and going to a better team and a better defense. Going to be a great situation. The role changed. So, again, it's about a defensive coordinator, a head coach, or a GM's interpretation of what his skill set is. Is he a versatile run stopper who sometimes you can stand up, like at A&M? Is he just more of a stand-up guy playing the role that Jared Verse now does for the Rams, right? Who is capable of putting his hand in the dirt, but he's a freak when he's on 2 feet and he can just get to all his moves, right? So it's going to be that. But I do think about, if we're going back to that 2023 form and that stand-up edge rusher, man, the Philadelphia Eagles are going to look at him. You know Howie Roseman. He's got look. They have enough depth. They can develop him just like they did with Nolan Smith, and just go, look, you don't have to play 75 snaps a game. I'll get you in 25, 30. We'll get used to it, and we'll just keep developing. And that's how things keep churning on a really good team like that.
Do not let Nick Scorton get to 32. Do not let James Pierce Jr. get to 32. Don't let the Eagles do it again with those two players. Because I'm with you, dude. I think Nick Scorton, I think he's being slept on a little bit in this edge class. But it is a loaded edge class. He's still probably worth a top 20 pick in the NFL draft just because of how good he was at Purdue. And listen, I think some people chalk it up to, he went to the SEC and he wasn't that good. I think it was, like he said before, I think it was more due to the scheme than anything else. It didn't really allow him to be as productive as he was with the Boilermakers.
And he and Shamar Stewart were still two of the best run defenders in the country.
Yes.
That matters. And I've talked about it for Jack Sawyer as well, and James Pierce Jr., the improvement. That also matters, to be able to even get in there and play on early downs if he's going to play in that role, more of the hand in the dirt, early down kind of role where we get some pass rush out of him, but it's a more balanced effort. So, look, you get so many different opinions on every player and what role they should play and what team they fit on. And I think when we see Scorton get selected, we're gonna sit at the desk, I should say, in Cincinnati. We're gonna go, okay. Now we know where we're going with this. We just have to see it happen.
All right, let's wrap it up, Dolan, with really an interesting podium we got from Jack Kaiser at Notre Dame, and how he kind of felt like he developed in his final year with the Fighting Irish. Just like we said before, he was a guy that was a rotational player last year, one of the highest graded linebackers in the country, came back for another year, was the leader of that defense, one of the best defenses in America, big reason why Notre Dame made it to the national title game, and he really had a great year as a linebacker. Now is one of the top linebackers in the draft.
Man, everything, it felt like when I was standing there watching Kaiser and just listening to him, everything he said was like content gold for a show like this. I was like, man, there's so many things here, personally, about Notre Dame, about the draft process, about the decision to go back another year. Like you mentioned, after such a great year the year before, and we know he's a great athlete, somebody will take a chance alone on the athleticism. But I want to start with what he said about his decision to go back, on top of obviously wanting to win, try to win a national championship, all that. Talking about the linebacker position and how it benefited him. A year of experience as the full-time starting middle linebacker on a really good defense, as we know. And I thought an interesting point, it's talked about for quarterbacks and offensive coordinators a lot, but he said, look, the opportunity to be the green dot, to have the helmet communicator, because you get one on defense too. It's usually the middle linebacker, about 95% of the time, sometimes a safety, but usually the middle linebacker, and that was Kaiser. And he said, that's something I wanted to do for a year before I got into the NFL and did it. I wanted to get in a huddle and call plays with everything coming through the helmet and, making adjustments, and then the mic shuts off when there's 15 seconds left on the play clock, and to be able to become an elite communicator on defense in that sense. That's something that a lot of times in interviews and through film watches, and they put these guys on the board about, they want to know about communication, right? And they want to know about, especially at those leadership spots, at linebacker, at safety, when you're talking about, okay, getting this entire defense set. So I thought that was an incredible job of just explaining, one of the big reasons that Kaiser went back for another year of experience, even though it was, his sixth year at Notre Dame, I believe, and he's played more games at Notre Dame than any football player ever, which is still, that's a crazy fact considering how old that program is. But no, I think he had a great answer about that working into the pre-draft process. He had some fantastic stuff about Al Golden and what he's done for him the last 3 years. And there was even a joke made about, they saw each other in the back. Of course, it's Al Golden now jumping from Notre Dame to be the Cincinnati Bengals defensive coordinator. He ran into him and he goes, "Hey, are you going to interview me with the Bengals?" And Golden looks at him and just goes, "No, we know you well enough, Jack. I don't need it. I got other interviews to do. I know you." Yeah. So it's just another. We
only get 45 of these, Jack.
But I love the example too of that. We're going to be talking about that with a few things with, say, the Bengals and Notre Dame defensive players, say Chip Kelly and all those Ohio State players, right? I keep thinking, I'm like, is he going to go get Will Howard? Is that what's going to happen? One of those 2 third-round picks, right?
Quinshon Judkins, they need a running back. Trayvon Henderson.
I've been digging in on even thinking about, okay, Jeff Hafley's with the Green Bay Packers, and I'm thinking about Donovan Ezeraku or a guy like Ozzie Trapilo. I'm like, there's so much of it that's about connect. Even player connections. Another thing that I liked was he mentioned, somebody had asked him, of course, have you interviewed with the Cowboys and whatever? And he's like, well, I've loosely talked to them. And remember Maris Leofau, his teammate from Notre Dame last year, the Cowboys draft. He's like, well, I've talked to Marist a lot about the Cowboys and the inner workings of all that too. So, we got to remember, it's all about connections between other players, coaches. Who do you know? Who used to coach you, right? There's so much of that goes into it. And then the third thing was talking about what's coming back to Notre Dame next year and young guys. And this is something we talked about a lot. He mentioned them. Same guys we mention all the time. Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, Bryce Young offensive line, right?
Yeah,
the receiver,
Drake Bowen,
Drake Bowen right next to him, right? And he talked about how much is coming back to Notre Dame, right? And I just thought about him like, where did we have him? 5th or 6th in our preseason, in our current top 25? I mean, they do have a lot of talent coming back, man. And I think, him going through some of those names, and I'm thinking, I'm like, yeah, good player. A great player. Like, you have some at their position, some of the best players in the country. And I just think about, we're going to be talking a lot about Notre Dame again next year, possibly in the playoff field, possibly, trying to get further if they figure out the quarterback situation. So, I thought it was good to hear from his perspective what is coming back to Notre Dame and how much talent is going to be there in South Bend this year.
I'm glad you brought up the green dot thing because this is brand new to college football, right? The NCAA just approved it this past year because after all the whole Connor Stallion sign-stealing controversy scandal, they've allowed players now, like in the NFL, to have the green dot in the FBS for offensive and defensive players. And like I said, Jack Kaiser took full advantage of that as well and became not only a leader as in terms of one of the best players in Notre Dame, but also a vocal leader for Notre Dame as well. So, yeah, I thought his podium was outstanding. And I think I love Jack Kaiser, man. I think not only is he a very cerebral player, very good football player, I think he's having a great week at the Combine, too. Like, he's a very athletic talent as well. I think he could end up being maybe a second-round pick in this draft.
On the communication thing, too, another guy I heard briefly talk about this was Jay Higgins from Iowa. Yeah. And he's obviously the middle linebacker in that defense. But it shows you how different defenses can have different roles even for the leaders, right? Where Kaiser talked about, hey, I get the green dot, I get the play call. We kind of do things like an NFL style. Higgins, it's more, he's like, yeah, I get the play call, but our defense under Phil Parker is very much about me adjusting things at the line of scrimmage. Kind of pre-snap still, but not so much being so stuck to the play call. So there's different ways of going about it, and I think fascinating perspectives on just how the leaders of those defenses have to run them as the bullets are flying. Because, you think, we watch on TV, 40 seconds is going, it feels like a long time, but that 40 seconds when you're on the field, either on the field or on the sideline, that goes quick, especially when you have teams in college trying to run at such a fast pace, some of them. So really, to me, fun to hear from two different guys who were the leaders of their defenses for multiple seasons talk about how they communicate and how they really run the defense from the inside out.
So as a recap of day 2 of the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine with the defensive line and linebackers at the podiums today. Of course, we'll have a recap again tomorrow. Who is on the podiums tomorrow? What position are we doing?
I think it's DBs. I think Travis Hunter's tomorrow.
Boy.
I believe we're gonna have to split this up because all at the same time we're gonna have Hunter, Will Johnson, and Jahdae Barron all going at the same time. I believe.
God, we're gonna be bouncing around.
Oh, it's gonna be a morning.
The Travis Hunter one is gonna be a mob scene tomorrow. I cannot wait for that one. But yeah, we'll have all the coverage from that as well, in addition to all the coverage covering the NFL draft and college football. So subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single video. For Dalton Wassman, for our producers back there, I'm Max Chadwick. We'll see you guys next time. Hey, thanks for watching another episode of the PFF College Football Show. Please make sure you guys subscribe to the channel.
Also, subscribe to PFF Plus at subscribe.pff.com for all of the same data and grades that we use in our show, plus fantasy tools, betting tools, and our mock draft simulator.